Hi, everybody. My name is Joe K, and welcome to another day in the underground. I just want to put out the disclaimer here. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of the podcast, but today is going to be filled with tons of information. We're going to learn a lot about someone that I've really grown to enjoy. He goes by the name of Jaime Bennington. Jaime, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. This has been like 2 or 3 months
I
on
feel
its
like
way.
we've been planning this for an eternity. So thank
Yeah,
you. Thank you to Johnny Hayes for setting this
yeah,
up and kind of connecting the dots for me. I know we were talking a little bit prior to the show here, but this was the last interview I had ever expected to do. But I think it's going to be really cool, and I'm hoping that it can help people get a little bit more information on you and kind of know who you are as a person and kind of what you've been up to. So I'm excited, man, and I'm ready to dive right in if you are.
I am. Yeah, and shout out to Johnny Hayes. They've been really cool to me, and I think in the same way you're saying, like this is kind of the last place I expected to be. I was surprised because I was talking. I'm an online presence, and I talk to a lot of people. So um, Johnny has just kind of always been there, and
Hmm.
we've had really great conversations. And then he's like, I think I have a friend who I you might want to talk to. And I was like, cool, let's hear it. And so I'm really excited to be here. They have such good energy. I trust that.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, what I'd like to do is just kind of let's start from the beginning. Let's start from the beginning. I want to know a little bit about kind of how you grew up. Like, what are maybe some of the first memories that you remember having as a kid?
Wow, first memories. I had a kind of strange upbringing for a lot of reasons. One of the ones that I don't talk about as much, but I've recently started tapping into more, is the fact that I was raised and trained to be a human, so to speak,
Hmm.
by women exclusively. And that's been something that's it's been something that's been interesting to me for my entire life because I think by the time that I was an adult out of college, 2018, I didn't even think about it anymore. And so some of my earliest memories are actually being like a daughter. It's like the strangest thing.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I don't even think I would have said it like that maybe a month ago. Um, because again, it's just those are thoughts, experiences, memories that I haven't really tapped into in a certain way.
Hmm.
And so, though I have this forward, I don't know what the word is, like image of me being like multiple people in one body, I don't think I've ever talked about being like a daughter or being raised by women in a certain way, how that affected me. And so, I
Hmm.
think my earliest memories are literally just like being around my mom and her sisters and the kids she would babysit, but eventually became my sisters.
Hmm.
So, I think I have a lot of feminine energy in my sphere right now, and so that's where I'm naturally drawn to. And moving up from there, I just I think I was just one of those kids that was in their head all the time. I don't think I have a lot of like exterior memories. I was around a lot of different people.
Hmm.
My mother was a single mother. She raised me on her own, me, my brother, who's a year younger than me. And so she was always working and she was always needing somebody to help her watch us. So I was always either with my mom or with a number of different groups of people, like families that I would spend a lot of time with. Um, and when I say I was with my mom, I mean either like I was at home with her, just being a normal kid, and her job was, she had a couple of jobs, but one of her biggest jobs when I was younger was um, cleaning houses. She was
Oh,
part of a house cleaning service. So um, I spent a lot of time in like empty houses while she was cleaning, just sitting there, like trying to find something to do. So I feel like a lot of my childhood could be maybe boiled down to or I guess like not even childhood, but just like earliest memories, earliest perceptions, just boil down to being raised by women, around women in this very feminine energy, and then being around these groups of people that were kind of staples in my life, either at work with mom, at home with mom, or with these people. Um, and
Oh,
that's like a million years ago.
yeah, yeah. No, how do you think growing up in that environment and around that feminine energy, as you said, has affected you today? Has kind of crafted you and kind of helped you mold into the person that you are today.
That's a great question. I feel like I have this memory of Chester, my dad, being like, it's like 2008, 2009, and he's like, Jamie, you're talking with your soft voice again. Like you need to speak with your man voice, your chest voice, or you'll sound like that forever. And I'm like, I'm starting through puberty and all that, and I'm just like, what are you talking? Like I can't hear myself, so I don't know what you're talking about. But when I think about that memory, it reminds me of like of that situation, how I grew up, because I think, I'm around a lot of women who have softer voices, as I'm growing up and learning how to be my own person. I'm obviously influenced by those things. So I can't really like express directly how it affected me in so many ways. But when I think of a way that it did affect me, I think of that. Like I probably had, like a softer voice and a different kind of affect. And then as it gets to like, puberty, your voice is changing. It's not exactly like the way that my father described it, in terms of the way your body changes and starts to evolve on its own, and the way that you interact with your body, it can change it. Like I don't think if I stayed in my soft voice that I would just sound like a soft voice person for the rest of my life. I think that, obviously the voice would change on its own. The
Mm.
body has its own chemicals and evolutions that it's going through. So there's no way to say for sure that I would have been stuck like that. But it's like the quickest memory that comes to mind, or the quickest effect that comes to mind, is like, I guess I just had like a really soft
Yeah.
affect. And
Again, last thing I was expecting to hear. Very very interesting though. It's very interesting. Um, so you mentioned kind of always being around your mom.
yeah,
Which I think can be a very very positive thing. And I think about this too. Even in my own life, it's like how much time have people been able to spend with their kids in the past versus now, and like just the way that the world is right now, a lot of people are
yeah,
working remote, so they're able to be there when the kids get out of school, or take them to all their activities right immediately after school. And there's not always that independence that some people have grown up with in the past, where parents were
yeah.
working all day and all night long, and like just not around as much, or you have two parents that are working, and you don't have that opportunity to really spend time, with your parents doing whatever it is they happen to be doing. In your case, it was your mom was cleaning houses.
Yeah.
Um, what other things did you spend your time doing when you were a child? Other than maybe being around your mom or being around your sisters. Like what did you guys do? Like what was a fun time that you may have had? What was like an experience that you may have had that
Yeah.
really left an impact on you when you were a kid?
I appreciate that perspective, because I think that's something that I talk about a lot in my own way, in my own time, is just how different the world is now compared to, because I was born in 1996. So that's a little past the mid 90s. There you go, the mid 90s line. So I think I count as, in terms of like a, what do you call it? In terms of the breakdown in generations, I think
Mm,
I'm like the last of the millennials.
yeah.
So that's really interesting to think about. And growing up in the 90s, especially that late into the 90s, was really strange, because you cell phones don't really exist the way they do now. Internet isn't real, not the way it is now. You can't just call somebody anywhere. You can't just see anything at any time, and your life is kind of boxed in by the work schedule and the cable schedule, what's on TV tonight,
Mm-hmm.
that's just so fascinating to me to think about how far we've come. I mean, I'm 28 years old. That's insane to think that only a couple of years before I was born, this stuff was just starting to enter into the world. And now it's all we have, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very strange thing to think about. And, but it's enlightening too. I think I'll go back real quick to the memory of just being in the workspace while my mom's working, being in a house that's empty while she's doing her thing. Like, you have crayons, a coloring book, you have um that's about it. Like, you might have some stickers or something, but
And
like, you're
any
not.
wait. What are we coloring? Like what are we coloring? The people want to know. What are we coloring?
I grew up on a lot of Disney stuff, so I'd have like Disney flashcards or Disney coloring books, but I also had like random cheaper stuff. My mom didn't have a lot of money, so I wouldn't say Disney was so expensive back then as it is now, but like, um, definitely more of like the Dollar Tree general store kind of thing. Like, you just picked it up, it was $2, you have it. And I think the other thing too is that a lot of my earlier memories revolve around the physicality of media. So while I might be drawing and coloring in these coloring books, totally disconnected from the world in a house that my mom's cleaning, and like maybe going crazy, right? Like, you might force yourself to take a nap at that point. You can't touch anything. You can't talk too loud. You can't bother mom. Like, you're just literally there until she's done. And I had a little brother, so that also added to some of the energy that was accessible during that time. So I was like able to hang out with somebody a little bit. Sometimes he had a dad. He would go, I imagine, to um, his dad's house every once in a while, and he wouldn't be with me or whatever. But on the other side of things, when you're actually allowed to be stimulated in a serious way by, say, like movies or television or video games, because that's like the era of the PS1 to PS2, PS2,
Mm-hmm.
GameCube. Um, that's a whole different story because you're playing Mario Kart, you're playing Max Payne, you're playing like Spyro, you're doing all these like really, you're kind of just jumping between these very interesting islands of creativity. And which sounds so strange because I'm saying like I was playing Max Payne when I was like 5.
Mm-hmm.
If you know what that is, that's just a
Yeah.
crazy thought. And because it's such an intense game, especially like in the middle, there's this whole like I'm a video game character meta fourth wall break that you're just like, I don't think as a child you don't even know what's going on, but like you do because you always know, but you don't necessarily always, you can't always define. So like you're constantly having your mind broken by things. I think that's a big memory of mine as a child, is just like the postmodern self-aware meta landscape that was developing in popular media. Like, that's, I grew up around the time of the Matrix,
Yeah.
coming out
Yeah.
and all these things. So like it was a very big conversation in the community, whether it was the community at home or the community at large. And that obviously larger community has an impact on the at home
Mm-hmm.
environment. Like, I don't know. One of my favorite things ever was going through the movie collection that my eventual stepdad had. His family had this whole room dedicated to VHS tapes. So I just,
You
what's
had to.
this
Those
one?
things are
What's this
huge.
one? Yeah, it's
I mean,
crazy.
they
It's
were
like,
huge. They took up so much
yeah,
space. You had to have a whole
yeah.
room if you had
They're
any kind of a
they're
collection.
this thick, this long, maybe this long. You got to wind them. You got to rewind them and shit like that. Like, what what is that? I exist in the age of YouTube now, where you literally just click around the
Mm-hmm.
time, the button, or the time. What do you call that? The they call it scrubbing, but what do you? I don't even think I have a word for that. The time. It's not a time stamp. It's like if we were
Timeline.
watching this
The
right now. Yeah, sure, timeline. Let's call it a timeline. Wow, I didn't realize I had such a
no
hole there.
timestamp. I don't. I probably timestamp. I
Yeah,
don't know, but yeah, be able to just click in a click of a button,
you
go to
can't. You
exactly where
had
you want to
to,
be.
back in the day. You had to literally rewind your movie, and it took like anywhere from like a minute to 2 or 3 minutes. You had to sit there. Okay, now we can watch it. Or if you wanted to go backwards, you had to stop the movie and rewind it to the part, hopefully the part that you were hoping for, but you had to also like watch it in reverse at high speed. So it's like it's just like thinking about the way that media and technology is so different now is always at the forefront of my mind. As far as like what I was doing at home, I was watching movies. My family was a big movie family. What we would do pretty much all my childhood, starting in the 90s, obviously, and moving through the early 2000s, it was always going to movies. That was it. Seeing Osmosis Jones or something in the
Mm.
theater by kids, 3D, and you get the scratch and sniffs. Like we went through a very, as I feel like my generation went through a very interesting time, and artists trying to like, and companies, not just artists, but trying to bridge the gap between the screen and the actual observer. I remember the scratch and sniffs were so strange. Like you smell, they're like, okay, you're watching a scene in Spy Kids, and then they're just like, now smell the dirty sock one, and you're like, oh, it's like there's a whole delay. It's fun to think about how creative people had to be in order to get their audiences to be engaged in the first place, and then them trying to push that. But yeah, movies, video games. At first, I didn't have a system in my house, so I would always play with other people. That was the Mario Kart era, and then watching TV was always a big thing. I think I'm trying to remember what shows were on. Like as I got older, this is later in the timeline if you know when the show was on, but we'd all sit down and watch Prison Break during the week or something.
Great. It's a great show. It's a
Yeah,
great
yeah.
show.
The reboot was insanely bad, but the show itself is so good. Like I've never sweated so much sitting on a couch. Well, actually, that's not true, but I'll say never sweated so much sitting on a couch while watching TV.
Yeah, it is crazy, how much things have changed. And I'm a similar age, I believe, as you, a little bit older maybe. But the technology from the time we were born till now has
Yeah,
continued to change so incredibly fast, and we've just been kind of accustomed to it, and we kind of expect it now. And I think that's probably to our benefit, because I can't imagine a world where I went from having nothing to all of a sudden, 20, 25, 30 years of just crazy pace of technology changing. That would be a lot harder than just naturally kind of growing up with technology as
yeah,
technology evolved, and video games have gotten way better, way more realistic. Well, better is subjective, but way more
yeah.
realistic. And graphics have certainly gotten better than, PlayStation 1 and N64
Yeah,
and stuff like that.
something I realized looking back on my childhood, which is something I do often, I realized how my brain processes images. I didn't realize just how much my brain wasn't aware of itself. Like the observer observing wasn't aware of the way that, say, a PS2 graphic, like you're playing Tomb Raider or something,
Hmm.
it looks so different than something on like Xbox 360. So like as I'm growing up, I'm thinking that like Max Payne is like cutting edge graphics, which at the time it kind of was in a certain aspect, but like it looks real to me. And I don't think I realized how real that looked until I played like Max Payne 3 way later in the timeline, and was like, wow, these graphics are kind of crazy. I wonder what the old one looked like, and went back and looked, and I was like, whoa, like how did that, like the fidelity of that escape me?
I
And I
Yeah,
don't know how it works still. I'm not sure how that why that happens.
it is crazy. I would imagine, and I guess I'd probably put myself in a similar category. But I'm curious to know, when you were a child and you were growing up, you mentioned playing different video games. Now, I'm assuming, just based on who you are, well, clearly he's had every system, every step of the way, like every game known to man. Just a
I
crazy
wish.
a crazy setup. What was your childhood actually like? Like, did you feel like it was a relatively normal childhood? Did you feel like you were living like way above, the means of most, or kind of on par with the rest of the world? Like, give people a little bit of insight into what that was like for you.
I think that really depends on what part of my life you're talking about, because um, when I was growing up with my mother, that was the first 8.5 years,
Hmm.
and she was poor, and she had her own struggles, and we were literally like at the bottom of the like ladder, the hill, whatever you want to call it, and it's hard for me to remember sometimes, but yeah, like I said, we got the cheaper stuff all the time. That was kind of the point. Was like, the movie tickets were cheap, but we'd stop going after a while because they raised the ticket prices. Or, um, you know, I want the new game, but can we afford it? And I feel like they always tried to do their best for that. Like, oh, my kid wants this. I want to give them something they like. But in reality, that was that was there was no living above anybody's means. We were barely breaking even, if that was
Hmm.
even something that was possible. And and then when I met my father after that, so I met my dad when I was about 8.5 years old, and oh, well, actually, sorry, that's not exactly true. I met him when I was like 7 and a half, because I asked for him when I was 5.5, 6 years old, and it took a year because when I finally realized like I had a dad and I asked about him, he had just broken hybrid theory,
Did
so he couldn't.
did did you know like did you know or comprehend at the time like who he was?
No, I probably heard him on the radio and had no idea, and that's just because I guess my mom didn't tell him about me, and they had this huge history where
Hmm.
they weren't really. I was told they were a couple. Then it turns out that maybe they weren't. It maybe might have been like a one night stand kind of thing, or an on and off kind of thing. It's really very unclear, and nobody wants to share that information with me. So I can't speak too much on it, but I can say that I didn't. I was always surrounded by father figures, so to speak, but they were never my dad, and they were not really ever in the picture for longer than a year or two. Um, my mom had a couple of partners. She even thought there was even a guy she thought was my dad before they did the DNA test. He like helped her out through her pregnancy in a very limited way. Um, it was sometime after it started to the time I was born, and then they got a DNA test, and they were like, "Well, that's not mine, so I'm leaving," and they just literally left. So, I had that very early in my life, and then my mom had this kind of thing where she had like this one boyfriend, and then she would like break up with him and then get with somebody else, and then get back with him and get with somebody else. So, and that apparently was going on even when Chester was around. So, like all the way
Hmm.
in high school, like back in high school. So I always had like people in my life, but I didn't ever think of like, oh, I should have a dad. That just never crossed my mind. So when I was like 5.5, 6.5 years old, I was just kind of like, hey, do I have a dad? Because my brother had one,
Hmm.
and he was not a very good guy, and he ended up not being in our lives after a very abrupt, physically intense episode. And after that, I was just kind of like, and I think part of it too is growing up. Like as you grow up, you become more aware of the world, so you know to ask more. To
Hmm.
be like, hey, these two people make a baby. Where's the one that made me? Like I think it just got to the point where I had not only seen so many people in my life in a certain way, like had those father figures, for example, and then it just kind of blossomed into a 5-year-old just going, oh, I'm a person. And then, mom. And then it took like a year after that. She introduced me to Chester through his music. So I might have heard him on the radio. I may have heard him like in the car. She had like his grade A CDs and whatnot. So it's a very interesting question of like, well, how much was he around before he was even around? Why did that happen that way? And then as of course, as he gains his stardom, and hybrid theory becomes like one of the greatest debut albums of all time, by industry standards, he gets more money and he gets more affluence. And so, but he always was somebody who like lost his money. He always lost his money.
Hmm.
He lost it to his first wife. He lost it. Apparently by the time he died, he was owing money. He was asking people for 7-figure loans. He was, um, when I was a junior in college around 2013, 14, he had to brief me about the fact that he may not have enough money to actually put me through college all the way, even though that was one of his promises. So I don't know why his money was always gone, but it was one of those things where he lived almost like he was a poor when
Hmm.
he had a lot of money, or was supposed to. And so like even growing up, video games, for example, were like, your parents have the conversation of like, well, how much is too much, and what are they allowed to do? Are M-rated games okay? And it feels like such a slap in the face later in life when I think about my mom, because she was letting me play Max Payne at 5 years old. I was playing a Dragon, like final, like Baldur's Gate 2. Like I was not, and I was in the most heinous of circumstances too as a child. So like, I'm around like drug dealers and methamphetamine and just like really hard stuff and not cool people. And so I'm not on the life side. I'm not like fresh to any of this by the time that like, Halo 3 comes out
Hmm.
or Black Ops, Call of Duty. And I'm not fresh to fantasy and violence and all these things. Like so it's weird for me to think back and be like, oh, I used to just play whatever I wanted. Like I'd be playing, like I keep saying Max Payne because it's easiest. I feel like that's an iconic game. Like that's something a lot of people would know about. I'd be playing that while I'd be playing like Monsters Incorporated or Cat in the Hat or something. So it's like
Quite the mix. Yeah, quite the
quite, yeah,
mix.
there's a lot going on. And so like later in my life when Chester did have the money and he did have the connections and he's getting like Halo 3 from the devs and like all these crazy things, it's like now they're having conversations about what's right or wrong for us to engage with, and I'm like, let me play Halo. Like, come on, man. And what's crazy is like you'd think that I had access to all these things, but I didn't. Like it was always a struggle to get, my dad would get like the new Xbox or the new PlayStation or whatever. He'd basically get it for free. People just send him stuff. But when it came to like the kids playing and what the kids wanted, it was always like, I don't know, guys, you need to slow down. And it's like, Dad, you're one of the biggest rock stars in history. Just give me a freaking Xbox and let me play co-op with my brother and you. Like we would have a lot of fun playing Modern Warfare 3 or local Halo, and we would just spend a lot of time like that. So and that's really where I think the happy memories come from in terms of playing video games. Is I think
Hmm.
like shooting each other in the face.
Yeah,
And
the irony. That's how it goes. That's how it goes. Did now through all of this, it sounds like there was almost like a kind of a weird transition period in your life where it was like scraping by to, hey, now my biological dad has unlimited money, like so to speak.
yeah,
Um,
especially from a kid's point of view.
well,
It's like,
yeah, well, especially, and I can only imagine how that must have felt for you and how difficult that must have been. Can you share a little bit about what relationships were like when you were, in your life in general, like with other kids, maybe in school? Did you go to school? Like, were you homeschooled? Like, can you tell us a little bit about kind of that period in your life and what how did it affect your life when that news kind of spread to the people that you were close with at the time?
that was weird because my mom wasn't doing good either. When I turned 8.5, she gave us up, me and my brother, to her sister because she couldn't take care of us anymore. And so it was really a very strange thing because I was basically like white trash, nothing, and in this very serious situation. And then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, do I have a dad? Cinderella style. It's like, hey, there's this one glass slipper, where's the other one, and they're like, hey, well, actually. And then a year passes, and I don't remember when it started, but I got like all the Linkin Park underground stuff. So like I had the old CD player with the headphones, the little tiny ones that don't go over your ear but straight on it, and or in it. It doesn't go in, it's just flat like that. And so like it bleeds out, and it's just such an interesting sensory experience. And I remember it like meditating on really early Linkin Park, just
Mm.
because you got all the little tapes and all of like at that time. I think by the time that happened, maybe Meteora was happening, so that's like 2004. And so I had like both albums and all of the special content that was reserved for their fan base, and the really nice looking book that came with Meteora, the making of Meteora and all that. So like I would just sit there and like listen and meditate. And I think that for me, a lot of the time I was just so happy to be involved in anything ever that I just didn't think much about the world around me like that. I've noticed that I've always been a very introspective, like to myself on my own kind of person. And later that would change because it became isolating,
Mm.
and the fame that preceded me everywhere I went didn't help with that. But yeah, I went from being like just this nobody kid to finding out that my dad was this rock star. And even by the time that, and this, because he had a history, Gray Days allegedly had a, well, they were on the production of their third album. By the time they broke up, they were skirting this deal. They were kind of just like beating around the bush with this Warner Music Group deal, or Warner Brothers at the time. So Warner already knew about Chester. Chester already was like making his way up the circuit and all that. And he quit music when the band broke up, and then he got that experience, that invitation to be a part of Linkin Park, and he took that immediately. And so by the time that Hybrid Theory was breaking, it was like he was already like the reputation came before him so in such a great, like, grand way. It's kind of unbelievable, because really when I think back on that time, I'm like, he wasn't that big though. Like he wasn't that big. He was. They had one album. They had been touring it for a few months before I asked about him, and or around the time that I asked him about him. And by the time that I asked about him, they had gotten so big so fast that they were like, which I think, by the way, was due in large part to the internet breaking, because
Mm.
social media and things like that were just starting to pop up, and they were taking advantage of that. They were meeting all of their fans in person. They were going into chat rooms and whatnot. And so there was a lot of manipulation with the internet, and that's cool. Use the tools to your advantage, right? Especially in an already so competitive of an industry. But it's like, no, that's where that came from. So all these people were like Chester before he was even Chester. You know what I mean? Like the Chester
Wow.
Bennington that everybody knows. His ghost was so far ahead of him that it even swallowed him in his death. So looking back on it is this very weird transition, because I didn't even go to live with my dad. I went to go live with my aunt, my uncle. And then from that point, I kind of oscillated between Chester and his first wife Samantha, and then Chester and his first or his second wife Talinda. So there was this whole like this is basically what my life looked like for like 4 years. By the time I was 8 years old, that started. So and that followed me everywhere, into school and to social situations. Everybody always wants to know what Chester's up to. Everybody wants to know what Linkin Park's going to do. They want to go to the shows and X, Y, and Z. And I think one of the strangest things that happened to me right away, once Chester met me for the first time, it took a year. He showed up. We ordered pizza. He had the lip piercing, the glasses, the bleached hair. But he was just so nice. And
Mm.
what's really interesting is I actually have like two sets of memories on that, because I remember him looking that way, but when I remember the pictures that were taken during that meeting, he had like a shaved head and like a whole different thing going on. So I'm like, I don't know why I think that. So I'm not really sure which one it was, but I remember seeing him a certain way. And then, I went to school, and I was bullied and just like treated generally pretty bad. And that was a partly because of the way that I was able to emotionally hold myself. I was a very emotional kid. I was easy to push down. I
Mm.
just didn't have the capacity to stand up, but I was also extremely traumatized. So everything that happened to me just on a normal level was like heartbreaking every time. And I realized that now as an adult, like I was genuinely just deeply affected by the way people treated me. And that was something I'd have to deal with all my life just as a normal person. The way that I was able to present as a child was very limited because I was traumatized, and I was very timid and sensitive. But I was also, my mom, she was not keeping up on keeping us clean and clean clothes and matching clothes and clothes that fit and feeding us appropriately. And so we were often like dirty, mismatched, poorly dressed, hungry, and just all those other things. And so people were additionally mean to me on top of that. Like kids are just mean, and then they were mean
Right.
on even more. And then when Chester met me right after that, I was people found out, and people, oh, your dad's Linkin Park, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Like, he's the whole band, huh? Even as a kid, that was just an interesting thing for me to think about. Like, oh, he's Linkin Park. And then I remember a kid coming up to me and being like, you are claiming that Chester's your dad, but he's not your dad. And I was like, but he is though. And they were like, no, he's not. There's this other kid over here saying that Chester's their dad, and that this is happening. And I was like, what? And so I went home and I told my parents, and they were like, what? Or just my mom, really. And they were like, oh, like, what? And then I gathered up like the courage to just go ask the question, like, who is it? Who's this person? And they said that the person had like been removed from the school and made to go somewhere else.
Mm.
And I thought that was really interesting, especially nowadays, because um, nowadays, as a child, I was kind of like, all right, maybe they were lying, maybe that's not what it is. But like as an adult, I'm like, yeah, I might have had another sibling. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. And and that kind of dynamic, that when that shifted and people just kind of knew who I was now, that conversation and that lens, it followed me all the way through the
How
rest of my
how did how did it make you feel? Like when
life.
like you went from like, you go from just a regular kid, right? Maybe some normal people picking on you, treating you for whatever, whatever your situation is at the time, just being kids, being jerks, whatever.
Yeah.
But now they find out, oh, you're Chester's son. Did you notice like a shift right away with that maybe those kids that had been really mean to you before, like did they continue being mean to you? Did they now
Oh yeah.
try to be nice to you because of who you were? Did other people come out of the woodwork because they found out who you were and now they had a vested interest in wanting to be your friend and talk to you? Like what was your experience with that?
I think it depends what area of life you're talking about, because as a child, I think it was actually very startling to have anybody know anything, because before, people don't know anything about you. They just punk on you because that's what they're doing, and it's
Mhm.
whatever it is, right? Like they don't care where you're coming from. They don't care who you are. They're gonna hit you with the tether ball as hard as possible because they want to see if you bleed a little bit, and that's just the way it is. But I noticed, because that happened around second grade, um, and I was already in like a really challenging part of Arizona. I grew up in I was born and raised in Glendale, and I was in and out of Phoenix for a lot of my youth before I was primarily in Gilbert, and then I went to college. Sorry, I went to high school in Tempe, and I went to college in Tucson. And so I just kind of was like, I've had this really interesting interaction with Arizona as I've grown up. And I think, if anything, in second grade, people learning that your dad is who he is, like, there's just so much animosity. Like,
Mm.
true, just like vile, like hate. Like, I think for a lot of kids who may have known me at the time, like, they literally thought I was lying. Like, they would tell me that I was lying and it's not true. They don't want it to be true. I could see a lot of kids get really angry about it. Like, you're lying, your dad's not Chester. Like, there's no way. Your dad? And I was like, yeah, I guess so. I don't know, dude. Trust me, I've been here wasting away just like you, okay? And then, when I got to high school, I guess is something I was saying today. I got to high school, and before I even got there for the orientation, everybody knew who I was.
Mm.
Like, literally walking in the door, like, oh shit, that's Chester's, that's the Linkin Park kid. And I'm like, what? Like, you guys already know, but I haven't even met you yet. Like, I haven't even been in the building. Little did I know that the building had historical significance for Chester, because it was
Mm.
previously the Electric Ballroom, which was a venue in Tempe, and it was shut down for a number of reasons, and then converted into a charter school called the New School for Arts and Academics. And so, and this is like a history that my family actively kept from me while I
Mm.
was there for 4 years.
That's
And so
wild.
it was just crazy. Yeah, when I realized just how much they lied to me, it's like, why? There's no reason. But apparently there is. And I think that was like the next evolution, because there was this kind of awkward period in the middle where you move from elementary to middle and then high school. And in the middle school era, it was, I mean, Linkin Park had just finished doing Minutes to Midnight, was just gearing up for A Thousand Suns. And that was like the peak of Linkin Park. Like, middle school for me was like A Thousand Suns. And what was crazy is that a lot of people were friendly to me. I had a lot of genuine connections with people in school, but I wasn't allowed to spend time with them.
Mm.
I was a very sheltered kid, which is why I said that was kind of like, it feels like a slap in the face all these years on, to look back and realize, like, how did you go from being this person who's like okay with literally anything to being someone who's going to check me on a Halo 3 match? You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of weird. But it was the same way all the way around. It wasn't just about media content. It was about, like, my friends came over for the night. They had to put their phone on the counter and take the battery out.
Mm.
Like, my mom was just a strict person. And so on one side, you have this like evangelical slash Baptist upbringing. On the other side, you have this guy who's literally living the most Luciferian life possible. It's like, and then they're acting like those things can coexist, and you're just like being annihilated second after second. Anytime anything happens, and then you're like mixed into this really weird industry culture. Like, in 2010, Diddy's, Sean Combs is out there being like, Catalyst is the best song ever. Like, I'm coining Linkin Park Day. And then Linkin Park's, to this day, like, oh, we have Linkin Park Day, but nobody wants to admit that Diddy was the one who did it. So it's like, it's like, you're meant to think that stuff's cool. Like, you're meant to think that, like, Chester going to dinner with Jay-Z and Beyonce is cool, but like, as you get older, you're like, oh, wait a second, that might be not as fun as it sounds, like, I don't know. And one of the memory that comes to me from middle school in particular was the school fair. They had like a festivity thing going on, and they had like they had like brought in like a what do you call that, a Ferris wheel,
Mm-hmm.
and so many other things. It was kind of strange. I didn't expect it to be so locked and loaded, and and I went to it with Chester. I was like, oh, I want my dad to come with me, and we're gonna have fun. And I remember all the kids flocked, like, literally. Like, you ever watch like a movie where like a religious figure who's like highly revered steps into the public and they all like swarm? They're like, oh my God, you
Mm-hmm.
God. It was literally like that. And it was a bit jarring, because there were kids at that school that like wouldn't Like they wouldn't acknowledge me for real. And I remember spending a lot of time trying to be friends with people, and they wouldn't bite. And but in this situation, everybody's like, they're literally saying this, like, Jamie's my best friend. We spend all this time together. I'm so happy to get to meet you. Like, wow, we're all here now. And I'm like, I'm in the High School Musical production with you, and I know for a fact you don't fuck with me. So you know what I mean? Like, it just hurt. Like, just sitting there, like, I could literally beg you to hang out with me, and you would act like I'm not even here, but my dad's here. So you're gonna tell them that we hang out all the time. You're a liar. And so, that's right before high school. And then I get to high school, and then just like my dad, my reputation is way ahead of me. It's like, and it's still, even to this day, it's way ahead of me in a certain way, because people don't really see what I'm even doing. Like, I have a lot of people now who do understand and who are following along and are participating in a certain way that is helpful. And I'm super grateful for that, but it's been an uphill climb.
Mm.
Absolutely. Um,
So
my Instagram says 22,000 followers. I don't have 22,000 followers.
it's an interesting perspective that you have, and I think it's a unique perspective. Um, so you let's just recap then. So you get through elementary school, you get through middle school, you start to kind of feel the effects of kind of who you are, right? As you reach high school.
Right.
What are you doing in high school? Like you mentioned maybe some of the was it the musical or play productions or the theater productions? Like what were you doing throughout high school?
I Yeah. So I have this weird relationship with art where I become self-aware at different times in different ways, and it either propels me forward into the art or makes me stop it entirely. And the easiest way to describe that is that when I was a little kid, I was very interested in animation. I mean, I grew up on animated movies, so that makes a lot of sense. But I just loved drawing, and my mom was an artist. Before her meth dependency took that out of her, she would just be making art all the time, and we would be very artistic with each other. Even in our visitations, our letters back and forth are very, they're very personalized and artistic. And she had this portfolio of visual art, like hand drawing and coloring and all that we would pull out every once in a while and look at. And it was always just so cool to see that. So paired with my upbringing in animated movies, Disney or All Dogs Go to Heaven or something, um, I just really wanted to be in art like that. And so as a little kid, I would draw and color all the time, going back to the coloring book and all that. And then I kind of stopped because it just happened. And then I got into reading. I was a big reader, and I was like, I want to write. And so I started trying to write. And then I realized, oh, I don't really have anything to say. I'm mostly regurgitating things that I've read. Like, I had like a Percy Jackson thing for a second, The Lightning Thief. And so I was like writing basically fan fiction, but it was like me trying to do my own thing. I remember I tried to do like a Zelda, for some reason. I tried to do like a Zelda fan fiction, or,
Hmm.
set it in like a fantasy setting or whatever. And I was like, I really don't have anything to say. So I'm just not going to say anything because I don't have anything to say. And so then I went back to visual art. So when I started high school, I was actually very far along the visual art route. But I have like a bunch of old, like, middle school drawings and whatnot. And I was, at that point, I was massively influenced by Avatar: The Last Airbender. And so I really wanted to do like anime and just be um, involved in animation. I just really wanted animation to be my thing. So when I started high school, I was actually in a charter school that was college preparatory and was focused on art, New School for the Arts and Academics. So a lot of our classes were like, you got to choose visual art, photography, music. And I started with my visual art class. I wanted to draw and paint and all those things. The person who kept that alive for me was really Chester, because even though my mom never touched art after I was like 8.5, um, no matter how much I tried to get her to do it, Chester was a painter. he painted his dogs. I have one of his paintings right here in my room. So for me, it was like I almost had my dad in me at that point. You know, it's like, oh, I want to be an artist. But that stopped very quickly because I became aware of the fact that I'm left-handed and I smear everything, I smudge everything, and it pissed me off. I'm like, I want to make this really nice, colorful thing, and then I want to write this long passage, and and I'm a little kid, so I don't have a computer or anything. So if I'm writing something, I'm writing in pen or in pencil, and I'm writing all the way down the page, and my entire arm is just, it got so frustrating. I was like, I can't do this. So, but I was in luck because when I was 12 in 2009, 2008, 2009, when I started middle school here in Arizona, I had begun to seriously consider my career. I was like, well, I'm going to have to do something when I grow up. And because my dad is who he is, maybe I might have an opportunity to be an industry artist, which would be cool, do the anime, do the music. And but I knew very, very surely at that time, like, I will not be given things. It was already hard enough. Like, if I'm saying video games were hard to get, I mean, like, meeting your idols is hard to do. Like, I don't think Chester ever introduced me to anybody that I wanted to be introduced to ever. I think I would literally ask him, like, hey, I want to meet this person. Like, I have this one memory. We're big fans of Manchester Orchestra, and which is a band I'm not sure you're familiar with, but they one of Chester's favorite albums is Everything to Nothing. And one day he came back, and I was on tour with him, and we were in this hub city, and he went out for a show, and he came back and he was like, oh dude, I just had the greatest time hanging out with Andy Hall. Like, that was so cool. And I'm sitting there like, really? And he's like, what? And I'm like, you hung out with Manchester Orchestra on tour while I'm here, and you didn't invite me, and what did you know about that? And he's like, well, I'm like, no, like, that's messed up. Like, that's really hardcore messed up. Like, your kid earns everything that he does. Like, I've never been the one to ask for anything. I've never been the one to go anywhere I haven't earned the right to be. And I think a lot of people lose that in translation because they think, oh, rock star, shitty kid, or rock star, you have access to anything. And that's not true. I was a very self-aware, I always mind my manners, to the point where it was like hurting me on the inside. Like, I'm self-mutilating emotionally. You know what I mean? Like, oh, you don't want me to have that feeling? I won't have it. And, but that was part of my trauma as well. And so when it got to me being 12 years old, I was like, well, I'm going to be in middle school, and then I'm going to be in high school, and then college has to happen probably, because my, at the time, stepmother was very into a higher education. So I imagined I'd have to do that. And I was like, well, I don't want to be a rock star. Like, I don't want to be like Chester. I want to do something different. And I don't know what, but all I know is that I want to be able to hold myself and express authentically and be authentic to who I am, and use that as a way to hold space for others to be the same way. And that started with self-discipline. I was like, okay, so what do I want? And we went to, I'd always dabbled at that point with, like, guitar, piano, like, I might like music, but I was really curious about music theory, and I really wanted to, if I was going to do something, I wanted to do it well, and I wasn't sure I could do it well. So I remember I was on the fence about it, and then we went and saw Sherlock Holmes, scored by Hans Zimmer, starring Jude Law, Robert Downey Jr., and all these other big names. And I remember walking away being like, oh, that's what I want to do. Like, oh yeah, that music, like, I'll crush that. Like, that'll be all I eat for the rest of my life. And that's when I really took it seriously. And I think around that time was when Talinda gifted me with, which is Chester's second wife, gifted me with a piano with light up keys. So I just started playing, like, light up key piano stuff. They, like, the keys light up to the song so you can play it. And then I was like, no, I want to like know, because the piano came with a book with all the songs in it and all of the notation. So I was like, oh, I want to know. And if I'm going to be like writing for movies and stuff, like I'm going to need to be able to write for like orchestra and whatnot. So I'm going to like need to know how to do that. And so at that point, I just like buckled down. I was like, sometimes I'd write, sometimes I'd do visual art, but it wasn't a big thing anymore. It was like, I'm eating this piano. I'm sleeping at this piano. I don't do anything else. And I think by the time that I know by the time that I got to high school, I'd already taught myself music theory, and I'd already gotten to a high level of performance. So when I got there, I was like, I want to do visual art, but I also want to do piano. And so they were like, okay, you have to do visual art for now, because we have a piano teacher maybe coming next year. And so my musical journey on that front, my desire to specialize and really hone those skills of the professional, it didn't come for a little while longer than I expected. And that's a good thing, because I decided after a couple of art classes, like, I cannot do this. I'm smearing this all over the place. I can't learn how to be right-handed right now. I'm just going to lose my mind. So I stopped doing visual art and started focusing purely on music, and that's when I got involved with my piano teacher, Marcos Crego, who is just like a phenomenal like Cuban jazz player. He's he's a really amazing piano player, and he was a really good teacher for me. And by the end of high school, I had done well over 100,000 hours.
Wow.
I was far beyond outlier mode, and I was already writing like string quartets and piano solos, and at like a almost like a professional playing level. And that's where I took my career in college, because I just dedicated myself to film, and that's where I got back into writing and I got back into directing, because I started scoring student films, and I was like, well, I don't like what you guys are saying, and I think I do now have something to say, so I'm gonna start writing my own scripts, and I'm gonna start learning a camera, and I'm gonna start, doing all this stuff on my own. And then I started actually becoming like a filmmaker, and I made my first full-fledged feature. I call it a feature film because it really is. In my mind, it is a full-fledged feature film, but it's an adaptation of a 100-line Stephen King poem called Paranoid Chant, which I completed after a 3-year production journey in 2021, February, like this time, 2021.
Wow.
So I had like a whole thing. That's why I was like, well, it's kind of it's kind of this like back and forth process where like I get into something, and then there's a reason for me to not be in it, and then I leave it alone, and then I come back and I do it like 5 times harder and 5 times greater, and then next time I'm doing it 25, 100 times. It's like this ever expanding thing. So yeah.
Was there ever a pressure, like you felt like you had to do something in music because of who your dad was, or was there ever an expectation you set for yourself because of who he was?
No, I feel like there was never any pressure on me to be anything. That all came from me.
Hmm.
I'm very good at being disciplined. I'm very good at focusing. I'm very good at getting inside and digging deep. Um, if anybody told me I had to be that, like what I am, I would have never done it.
Hmm.
Um, just because I feel like, especially when it comes to art, it has to come from within. There's no other, there's no like, there's never going to be like a record exec telling me to hurry up. You know what I mean? I won't do it. You will not push this out of me. I'm very David Lynch that way, like I will make the art how it is. And if you don't get it, then fine. And if it's not fast enough for you, then you can go find somebody else, because this isn't about industry. This is about expression. This is about communicating symbols. And if I'm not able to translate the symbol, we're not talking. Right. So,
Hmm.
and that's just the way I am. So, but Chester was always very like, you can be whatever you want to be, just apply yourself. And that is how it was. So there was never any pressure to be anything, but I will say that in my mind, Chester Bennington, like honestly, at this point, I feel like one of the greatest performers I've ever seen, and I didn't even know this until the halftime Super Bowl show. uh, Kendrick Lamar's like that performance was just, I'm gonna just, it was fucking bananas. Just the coordination between everybody and the clarity of his. And for as amazing as my father is, one of the best that's like ever been, in my opinion, especially for what he does. His performing is so long. Like when he's a, nothing in my mind is greater than A Thousand Suns tour for Chester, because he was singing, playing taikos, working out guitar riffs. Like he was doing like, they're doing When They Come For Me, and he's like, he's doing that while he's like, he's like, holy shit, this guy's on stage doing that. And he was so proud too, like, because they got to the point where they were making music as a band that needed a whole rig. Like the drums had to be separated between 3 different people and the vocals had to be 5 different people. You know what I mean? Like it got really big. And so to watch him perform like that and see how proud he was, and to see him overcome all the physical adversity that he was facing and mental adversity, like I couldn't even get that guy to sit down and let me teach him music theory. He would just shrink up, start sweating, and like never talk to me again. So it's like, he had this certain insecurity about certain things. And it was just very interesting to watch that unfold. And for that, my first concert ever was here in Arizona, and they're playing like In the End, or Breaking the Habit. It was Breaking the Habit, Meteora, which one of those songs is, I think In the End is on Hybrid Theory. But there are these just big pieces, and seeing Chester do that so young is literally mind-blowing. Like not only do you hear that your dad is this person and you're sensitized to his work, but then you go and see him in concert, and it's like, I've never seen anybody perform like that ever. I've never heard anybody with that kind of uh, tone. I think the closest thing was a Home Shake concert. I think Home Shake was like the sickest concert I've ever been to. And the only thing I imagine that could second that is like a Kendrick concert. Because after, and the thing is like with Kendrick Lamar, I talk about him a lot. But it's because I resonate with him, and I only know certain parts of him because I only have access to certain parts of him through my experience. And so I really only go where my intuition tells me to go. Like I'm getting back to the Untitled album. I'm getting back to Section 80. I'm getting back to those things. But like, that's not where I started. I did not start from the bottom and go up. I started at Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers and went down and up and down and up. I'm constantly oscillating between his newest and his oldest. And for me, I never watched a performance of his. I just never thought of it. I used to be somebody who was always like, I want to see how good they can be on stage. Like, cause my dad was a performer. So like one of my favorite bands as a teenager, not now, was a band called Muse. Watching Matt Bellamy shred live and the laser show and all that, that was insane. Like still didn't top Chester performing. And it's not just because he's my dad. I feel like he's genuinely that good. Matt Bellamy just doesn't have the voice for that. Like I just don't like, or the articulation. Like Chester just has he brings such a weight to the lyrics and the performance that it's not really comparable. Like there's no reason to compare, but it's not really comparable. And I think that watching Kendrick last night or the other night was like watching Chester at his height, and Kendrick's so far beyond that. I was watching it with Chester. Like he came in and he's like, because it's Super Bowl, he's a big fan of the Super Bowl. He likes football, and he was just like, I could feel him come in like, what's going on? And I'm like, this is the Super Bowl. He's like, what? And I'm like, yeah, it's 2025, and Kendrick Lamar just flipped off the president and Drake at the same time. It's pretty sick. And he's just like, what? And I'm like, yeah, you remember this guy when you died? Damn was charting. So like this guy right here, he's better than ever right now. Like he's and I could just feel him and internally like moving around like, oh my God, that's what I wanted to be. That's what I was trying to do. And I'm like, I know, that's why I'm watching it with you. You know what I mean? And so that was really special for me. And then to see it be literally like a moving picture, like it's such a dense performance. Like it is peak art. Like you have this choreographed stage play that is a musical, and also like a ritual. And it has so many layers of depth and so many just like there's just so much energy to it. I feel like that when I saw that, I was like, oh, that if I'm unleashed, that's me right there. And that's beautiful to see because I love seeing myself in other people. But also like I'm my dad tried so hard to be there and do that and to be in that energy. And I mean, look at Linkin Park right now. You could tell very quickly they aren't about the same thing.
Mm.
Mike Shinoda and the gang, they're not about the same thing. Emily Armstrong would not be in the band. Scientology would have nothing to do with any of this. They wouldn't have done what they did. They came back during International Suicide Prevention Month. Like, and they've consistently ignored me. And there's all these other things going on for people who have been following along with me. Like they know, but it's a lot. And obviously they're not Kendrick. I was laughing so hard. I was like, dude, Mike Shinoda and the gang want to come out and be like, something's coming. It's like, okay, shut the fuck up. Look at that. You are literally babies. Like when there's a video of Mike Shinoda responding to a live chat question of like, I heard Eminem might want to fight, like rap battle you. And they're like, that's literally like a nuke falling on a toddler. Like I would not win. And I'm like, yeah, you wouldn't because you're a bum ass rapper and you write vibes. You don't write like you don't write. You're not doing Mr. Morale. You're not doing GNX. You're not doing Meet the Grams. If anybody's doing it, it's me. Like I'm literally I've just been so embarrassed for Linkin Park lately. And I don't mean to shit on anybody who likes the music. If you like it, it's yours, right? But I think there are good moments on the album. But for the kind of thing that they claim to be, and then to see that halftime performance, I'm like, bro, you wiped the floor. You didn't even have to talk about them. And
How
yeah,
how how so obviously recently they bring in Emily Armstrong.
yeah,
They I'm gonna be fully transparent. Okay, I have heard the music. There's plenty of songs I like of Linkin Park. I
yeah,
wouldn't consider myself like a super fan of Linkin Park. I tend to stay in the underground hip hop space mostly, but
yeah,
I mean what they did, in the past and over the years is it's legendary, right?
yeah. It
It's
is. It
it's
is.
it's legendary. Um, I was very surprised because when the band loses somebody like Chester, who literally to even your average listener of Linkin Park is the band, it's hard to fathom
Yeah.
coming back without him and coming back and doing the same songs trying to be him.
I just watched a compilation video made by a fan. It's like split in the screen, and Chester's on top and Emily's on bottom, and they're singing in tandem the same song. And they're like, "Oh my god, this is just so incredible!" And Emily's literally over there like, "That's what it sounds like." And I'm like, "Oh my god, like, no, you guys don't hear the difference. You don't hear the difference. If you go back and listen to Minutes to Midnight, you will hear overtones in Chester's voice, and it's the cleanest, purest note he's hitting, and he's hitting down here, and it's up here like by an octave or some crazy shit, and you're like, that is literal mastery over your own body and your own mind, and you can hear it and you can feel it, and like for anybody to sit there and say that, well, Emily's just different or whatever, you're so lazy. Like, come on, guys, you obviously don't know what it means what he was doing. You don't understand what he was doing. That's
How
crazy.
how when you found out, because I know there have been videos in the past, that I've seen and things like that, and different articles that people had different commentary about, kind of what you felt about the situation at the time. But coming directly from you, like you get what was it like when you got the news that they were coming back out and they were coming back out with Emily Armstrong and going to be doing your dad's old songs?
You know what's crazy is I gave Mike Shinoda like massive benefit of the doubt. True, true. In June, when he did his post traumatic 6 year anniversary, I did call him out and I did say he was a whitewashed colonializer. And I know that's not the word, but that's the way I said it. Because what a ridiculous situation that he preys on his audience and their emotional connections, and he has. Part of my feeling was directed at his wife as well, because I had a falling out with his wife, who was a mentor of mine for a moment, and over to Linda and a couple of other things. And for me, it was like, I'm just calling Mike out for writing a shitty album. Like, Post Traumatic is such a slap in the face to my dad, to their time together. It's so insensitive, and he started writing it immediately. He premiered his first song in October when they did the Hollywood Bowl show. So like, watching it go and having Mike so seriously in my life and Anna so seriously in my life, and then to have all that break apart and be what it was by the time that Linkin Park came back was really challenging. And what was in particular challenging about Linkin Park coming back was that Mike was like watching me talk about him. I could see him doing it on my social media. And then when I finally started talking about, like, for example, the malpractice that Linkin Park has participated in with Kyle Christner, the bassist who tracked bass for Hybrid Theory and then had his name stripped and his credit stripped and his royalties refused. He restricted me and then shortly blocked me, and now half the band blocks me. And so what was really interesting about all that was, like, I was like, why is he watching me? Like, there's got to be something happening, right? Like, why is Mike on social media looking at me at all? Like, I had a falling out with his wife 2 years ago. But they all knew that I was going to come out and tell my story and do the whole thing, because I told everybody years and years and years in advance. And so when I came out and everybody's like, oh my God, who would have thought? It's like, yeah, well, you should have. I told you. And so when I heard the Linkin Park news, I found out with everybody else.
Mm.
I didn't learn from anybody. Nobody.
So there was no like phone call from anybody, or
no
like
text.
nothing from like your
No.
nothing, absolutely nothing.
No, I just happened to be online, and everybody was like, oh, Link, because early in the year, in April, Jay Gordon did that whole fake out where now he's acting like he had no idea what was going on, but in reality he knew the whole time, because he literally said it word for word. He was like, Linkin Park has a new girl singer and they're totally locked in and it's going to be awesome. And then somebody was like, this is all scripted. No, it's all scripted, because Jay Gordon said some shit and then he immediately said that he was a stupid idiot who didn't know anything and has no insider knowledge, and then it turned out to be exactly true. So it's like, okay. And Jay Gordon did a Reanimation remix way back in the day. He was a part of Orgy, which had Ryan Shuck in it, who is the guy who introduced to Linda and Chester, Chester's second wife. And so and then Ryan became one of Chester's band members in Dead by Sunrise. So there's like a whole network here. But no, like, nobody, not even Talinda, not Anna, not Mike, not Joe, not anybody who could have possibly said anything, not Brad, who has my literal phone number. He's like, no word. And then it's just be a part of something and 100-hour timer and then 100 hours more. And then I was like, I literally called it. I said, watch, guys, they're going to announce an LPU showcase. They're going to probably raffle tickets or something. They're going to announce a new song. They're going to announce a new album. Probably the band's coming back. Like, they're going to do the whole thing. And then what happened? They did their September 9th performance. And they didn't even mention that Brad wasn't on stage or why until like midway through the show or after the show. It was like, what? And then for Mike and Emily and the band to be so like, well, Brad doesn't want to play because of his mental health challenges. It's like, you guys literally did this during International Suicide Prevention Month. You know where I stand on the issue of Chester Bennington. You know how I had all these fallings out with people. You know that there's this domestic violence restraining order falsely imposed against me by Chester's widow because I'm telling the truth and they don't want me to tell the truth. So, they lied about me under oath, and you have all these things going on. And then they're going to sit there and be like, we're not going to talk about Scientology. We're going to acknowledge Brad, but not anybody else and their mental health struggles. Not even the fans. That was the hard part. I had so many, because I happened to come at a time that was intuitively correct. Like I said, I follow my intuition. Like I said with the Kendrick thing, Kendrick is not mutually exclusive as an artist from the situation that I'm in terms of his inspiration and the way I resonate. I resonate with him because he's in the same spot. You know what I mean? We're on the same level, experiencing the same things from very different parts of society and very different timelines. You know, he's almost 10 years older than me. So, you know, it's a very intuitive thing that I do. And when I happened to see all of this going down, I was right there in front of everything. I called them out on every single thing that they did. I held them accountable. And that's how, you know, these media outlets started picking up on me, but they also misreported, and they never mentioned the Picture Pieces archive, and they never mentioned what that I'm opening the only real investigation into Chester's death, and that I have already done that, that I'm the only one in the family doing the work to figure that out. They basically just didn't report on me at all. They just said that I like tried to fight Mike Shinoda.
Do
I was
they
like, I didn't try. I did.
do you feel like a lot of people try to blow you off and just say like,
Oh
you
yeah.
know, oh, he's crazy, or oh, he's, you know, whatever, fill in the blank, right?
Oh, they say it to my
Um,
face.
hmm.
I've had hundreds of people come to me in the last 6 months to a year and tell me, oh, the last 2 years, we'll say the last 2 years. I've literally had death threats. When Chester died, people were telling me to go off myself. When Linkin Park came back and I showed any kind of resistance, they did it again. Except for the irony was this time they didn't even realize that they had shot themselves in the foot in a way, because they were all about Chester when Chester died. All so emotionally overwhelmed by the fact that he died and nobody saw it. They came after me. They were like, you're a shitty son. You should have done better. And I'm like, you have no idea what our relationship was like at that time. So you don't understand how that's literally impossible. That I was the one who reached out to him in February of 2017 and admitted to suicidal ideation. Like, you have no idea. You guys are all jerks. And that started my whole, uh, it really seeded my modern social media presence, because, you know, I'm anti-bullying, I'm anti-violence, I'm pro-discussion. I'm very forward about things that I want to talk about and things that I think are right and or wrong. And that kind of started that because I had to take on cyberbullying and I had to take on all these other things. And so, and that's all like on my social media. You can see the footprint from all the way back then. You can go look at my Instagram and actually look at the posts. And that was back in 2017, 2018. So, you know, I wasn't new to this kind of energy, but they literally do. Like when I said anything against Mike or anybody, Emily, anybody, I had people saying, you know, you should go join your dad. You know, you're worthless, blah blah blah. Like you don't fucking know anything. Nobody cares about you. I had people coming up to me and like, because Chester's first wife is starting this, they have this whole thing against me where they're like trying to prove without DNA evidence that I'm not their son's biological sibling, that I'm not Draven's blood brother, and that I'm actually not even Chester's child at all. They're trying to prove that I'm like, with no evidence, they're just saying this, that I'm not safe to be around the family, that I'm diagnosed schizoid, paranoid schizophrenic, which they know I'm not. And we've had conversations about how I'm not diagnosed with anything. And then they offered me help and took it away because they wanted it under conditions. And I said, no. Like I said, you're not going to get a record exec in here telling me to hurry the fuck up. Like, no, I know where my boundaries are and I'm telling you no. So with her, it was the same thing, a very similar situation of coercion, and she didn't like it. And so, you know, she created this whole narrative around, and apparently this has been something since way back when Chester he didn't learn about me, when he was able to have that relationship with me and start treating me like his kid. Um, they apparently everybody on Chester's side of the family doesn't even believe that I'm his biological child. Uh, that's something I didn't realize the depth of until I was told that to my face by his mother and his sister in like last year. So, you know, it's a very complicated situation. And these people, they do come up and they say some mean stuff. And even the Church of Scientology threatened violence on me. When I went to the Kia Forum show, which was the first show on their From Zero World Tour, um, I had somebody hit me up, Scientology emblems and all, and was like, me and my bros are dropping 4K on this and we're going to show up and beat the shit out of you. And, you know, like, we're doing it for Mike and for Emily. And, you know, on behalf of Mike and Emily, greetings from Mike and Emily. And I showed up anyways. I was like, then do it. Then do it. And You know, it never happened, but that is a threat, you know. And I even asked the band to like like step in and say something, have them like, I asked multiple times. I was like, can you set a standard for your fan base? You know, tell them that this isn't okay to treat somebody this way. You can go on my Instagram right now, go to my pin posts, like just my I call them pin posts, but they're just standard Instagram posts, the photo posts. And you can look at the comments. There's legit hate speech, like threatening of lives. There's all sorts of awful stuff. And they don't really care. There are people who care, but anybody who does that is not a fan of Chester. They're a fan of Linkin Park. Because Linkin Park is the radicalizing agent here. Linkin Park is the one who's saying it's okay to back you know, a rapist apologist and not hold somebody accountable for their relationship to Scientology. Like, Emily isn't just some rando in Scientology, by the way. She's the daughter of like the second in command of Scientology. She's been a Warner signee. She's been signed to Warner since she was like 15 years old. She's almost 30. She's almost 40. Mike's almost 50. Like, she's so ridiculously connected and so like, it was funny because in some of these interviews, Emily's saying like, all those years ago, I didn't even realize that Danny Masterson was what he was. And it's like, girl, that was literally last year. That wasn't years ago. Last year, you showed up at his hearing and allegedly intimidated Jane Doe's. And you were still friends with him when you came with Linkin Park. When Linkin Park came back, I called her out for being friends with Danny Masterson on Instagram because a lot of people were pointing it out to me. And immediately unfriends Danny Masterson, offers the most basic, shallow, Cali girl fucking apology for um, what she participated in and what the crimes were that Danny was being tried for. It's like really brutal and awful. And it was one of the saddest, like most inauthentic apologies ever. But you know who ate that up? Linkin Park fans. Well, she said it, so move on. No, no, not at all. No. And what's strange is that like apparently Emily met the band in October of 2017 because she was pushed by forces that neither Mike Shinoda or Emily Armstrong want to be solid on. They don't want to clearly define it. So Emily will say, I wanted to be a part of the Hollywood Bowl show, but I didn't think I could ask. Then my friends convinced me to do it. And then Mike's over here like, yeah, you know, I think it was actually Rob Borden that connected us. And it's like, wait, how do you not know if Rob Borden of Linkin Park connected you with Scientology's Nepo Queen, or if her friends pushed her to it? And you know what's really, really weird about that situation is like, where the hell is Rob Borden? I don't know if you know anything about that, but on top of Brad not wanting to perform live and having a stand-in for every perceivable future show, one of the founding members alongside Mike and Brad is Rob Borden, who happens to be the drummer, and he didn't come back. But as far as early as 2022, he agreed to be a part of at least a 1-year contract with the LPU fan base. He said he's the first name signed on the LPU letter. He said we're going to start taking photos and doing diary entries and like public journals for our fans, and we're going to be so connected. Basically, they were trying to do what I said I was going to do before I did it. And then when Linkin Park finally came back, Rob wasn't there. And then Mike's like, oh, well, Rob was, you know, it was before even Hybrid Theory box set came out that he decided to leave. He wasn't even a part of that. But like, if you go watch the Hybrid Theory box set interviews, Rob's literally in the interview. So it's like now they're lying about things all over the place. Nobody's stopping them. They said that they randomly came back and all that. And then I'm watching them. They got the Major League Baseball sponsorship and they got the League of Legends sponsorship. They're in Arcane on Netflix. So that's interesting. And it just keeps going. And it's like, you guys planned all of this for years. And then my research happened to turn out that they reincorporated in 2021. So they were planning this all the way from 2021. And then Mike's like, well, we were going to drop in January of 2025, but then, you know, we were thinking about it. And so we pushed it back to December of 2024. And then now it's November 2024. And it's like, you pushed it back for no reason. Are you sure it wasn't because somebody out here was saying some shit that you needed to get ahead of? Like, that's really weird, Mike. And so like, just going back to the question of like, what was it like to learn all that? I already knew something was up. It was so weird that they chose to do what they did the way they did it, knowing that I had a literal camera on them,
Mm,
and that I had developed a community and an environment through which I was able to express authentically. Like I had already started telling the truth about Talinda. That's why I got the DVRO. I had already called Mike out for being a colonizer, a whitewashed colonizer, preying on the emotional connections of his victims, fan base, and that it was a long running trend for multiple years, starting with post traumatic. And he watched me do that. And then they came back and they did what they did. It's almost like everything they did was designed to slap me in the face.
mm,
And then you find out that even more of Chester's work is coming out through Dead by Sunrise. They're doing a revival with Warner Music Group, and Linkin Park's involved. And it's just like, dude, you guys just want to eat Chester's corpse. Like that's all you want to do. You got him in a freezer and you guys just piece him apart when you're hungry. And it's like when your grandpa goes and kills a deer in hunting season and makes jerky out of it and has jerky for the year sitting in the basement. It's like it's really messed up. And they know that there's enough going on in terms, like, all the media misreported what happened, and like I said, and so like they know the media is already bought and paid for. They know that whoever's invested interest they're protected. I mean, they have the Church of Scientology behind them, for God's sake. So like, it's
mm,
like they know what they're doing is dirty. They don't care, and they did it in front of everybody, knowing that nobody would stop it.
mm,
And going back real quick to the final point here, which is one of the hardest things to watch was the way it impacted the fans. Because not only did they throw Chester away, but they threw away everybody that cared about him. Because really, those people are the bleeding heart of the fan base. And there were so many people that I just, because I was in the right position, I had already set myself up intuitively beforehand. It was like catching people speeding on the street. I'm just like clocking it, clocking it, clocking it, clocking it. I have all this evidence on camera of the closest people to Chester being absolute dirtbags years after he died, and then they had this history of it. And then I'm watching them just destroy these fans, these people who legitimately relied on the music for their own healing and happiness and their own stability, because they can just get new fans.
mm.
They don't care. And I asked them multiple times. I said, even if it's not for me, like, do it for them. Like, take care of your people. And they were like, no, we got new ones. It's all good. We don't give a fuck. It doesn't matter. It does not matter. And at first they were really shy about saying it. They even tried to say something like as stupid as, we didn't know we had any fans. We didn't even know if anybody wanted to see us come back out. Like, shut up. What are you talking about? You guys had literally at the time, you guys had, if not 30 million, 33 million monthly listeners on Spotify because of your box set shenanigans. Like, they were priming people for years to prepare for this new thing. And so it's just really sad. It was really sad to see so many people downtrodden and stomped all over. And there were people who had to leave the internet. They were like, I can't be here anymore. Like, I don't know who to trust or who to believe anymore. Like, I put so much of my time and effort into these people, and they seemingly don't care if I live or die. And it's like, yeah,
Mm.
that's what we were saying about Chester. That's the situation around Chester's passing we were talking about. So
There have been quite a few different conspiracy theories that are out there. What do you think happened? And maybe what is maybe the craziest conspiracy theory that you've heard?
I don't talk about it often, but I'll be fucking damned if I can't see the visible relationship between the way that John Podesta and his brother look compared to Chester and his brother Brian. I saw somebody sent me a picture, and they did John Podesta up here and Chester here. They did John's brother and Brian, and I went, there's like no way they're not related. That's some blood connect, like that's like bone structure and skin tone and eyes and ears. And John Podesta looks like fucking Chester Bennington. It's weird. Like, there's a difference, but it's like a cousin's difference. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
There's,
yeah.
but like, it's weird. And I didn't have anything to say about it for a while. And I still don't really, because there are a lot of weird things, you know. It is beyond a, like, it's not a conspiracy theory. Chester Bennington was involved with the Clintons when he died. It's a fact. It's not me out here trying to pull some shit together. It is a fact. He was literally pictured with the Clintons 3 years before he died, all the way up until he died. Mike was involved. And by the way, Mike's got a weird ass history. He's up there with hanging out with people related to like Epstein and Trump and what was the other guy? Mike is in all sorts of weird positions with people. And I think that people don't take that seriously enough. Like the fans, they're just willing and wanting for anything. So they'll take anything. But like, if you really sit down and you look at Mike Shinoda, it's like, man's worth $65 million. He literally controlled the narrative of Chester's death after he passed, created a whole career out of it, used that career to workshop Linkin Park back into a working state, brought Linkin Park back. He's the head of Web3 development for Warner Music Group, which is crazy. And he's in with like people like Ron Burkle, who has ties to Epstein and Trump and Sean Combs. And that's a weird situation too, because I don't think enough people covered the mysterious death of Ron Burkle's son. I believe that's his first name. But Daddy Burkle, he had a son. And he was friends with some of Sean Combs's kids. And he was in a production. He had like a production thing going on. He was a filmmaker. He was going to make something. I think this is like so strange. Like, why would nobody talk about this? He was going to make something about the industry, supposedly. And then he had this like lunch date with one of Sean Combs' kids. And the day before they had that conversation, he mysteriously died by what appeared to be suicide. It's like, why does nobody talk about this? And why is nobody talking about how Mike Shinoda, who had a similar event in his life, is literally pictured with this Daddy Burkle? And there are just connections that go back and back and back. It's like, I won't go over them now because one, they're not so fresh in my mind, but also I talked a lot about it this last year. But like Mike Shinoda is a very seedy character. Like when you really look at who he's hanging around and how he treats people and how he talks about things, like this guy literally had the balls to get on an interview, a Linkin Park interview, and ask if he's allowed to say he feels like he looks unhoused while he's living in LA, which has a very serious homelessness problem. And he's worth $65 million, allegedly, if not more. And he's definitely worth more now. And it's like, okay, that's weird. And I think that when you look at anybody else in the band, they're all weird too. They all do weird things, and they're all strange people. But with Chester, you know, he allegedly told his sister, Toby, who was a part of 320, a part of the mental health movement that was stimulated by his death. I was, you know, very close to her for a moment. She said that right before he died, that she would have these phone calls with him, which is not untrue. He would have like long phone calls with his family. And that he told her that he was sick and tired of being around the Clintons, but the guys liked him. That they made him sick and he didn't want to be around them anymore. This was at the same time that Hillary was being investigated by the FBI for that hidden server she wasn't supposed to have. She had left her position in the government for the presidency. The Gmail leak, the John Podesta Pizzagate scandal started, where with the coded language implying child trafficking and human trafficking, and the DNC was leaked. They got hacked, and then it was like, oh no, the DNC's bought and paid for. Yeah, no shit. Hillary's literally lives off lobbying. What are you talking about? And it was like a whole thing. And then Trump was doing his whole like, you know, his whole video had surfaced of the, you know, grab her by the power will let you do anything. And it was just like very chaotic time. And apparently he told his sister, like, I'm not allowed to tell you what I'm doing, but I'm undercover with my buddy Chris. And he just said Chris. And I need evidence. Like, if I tell you, you might lose your life. But when I get through this, and he thought he would, when I get through this, you'll be so proud of me. And then he died. And Toby told that to some people in Germany, allegedly, who flew to the US to talk about it with her. But Warner Music Group allegedly got wind of it, intercepted the group, sent them back home, and then told both groups, if you ever talk about this again, like, you're going to be in really big trouble. Hmm. And so, you know, to go back to, like, what do I think happened? I was a firm supporter of his suicide, 100%. I thought that, you know, I was suicidal right before he was suicidal. He had literally just been in rehab the year before I told him that I was suicidal. He died the way that we talked about. We didn't talk about the way, like, meaning like how he died, but we did talk about dying. And so, you know, when it got to that point, I was like, I wasn't even talking to my dad. He disappeared 6 months before he died. He just slowly faded out of my life until total, like, he was literally a ghost by the time he died. And so I wasn't surprised at first, but then after a couple of years, around 2022, my intuition started getting a lot better. I did a lot of internal healing, and things started clicking really tightly. It was around Astro World Festival that I was like, oh, wait a second, hold on. And I started looking at things like, wait, put this in this, and hold on. This thing's been like there's a picture, and it's a glass mural, and somebody blew it to pieces. But I know what that mural looked like, and I know where these pieces go. So hold on a second. And I uncovered that I had been brainwashed at least 2 or 3 times in my life by my family, by the people closest to Chester. That they use the same tactics seemingly today, and they're trying to use them against me now, but they're not working. That Chester seemingly went through the same thing, because what happened was, when I realized that in his passing I had been treated the exact same way. The only difference was I wasn't a husband, I wasn't a best friend, I was a child, I was a nephew. And but I was Chestered, so to speak. And what happened was, when I started becoming clear on myself, I created timelines. So I literally created, like, I was a documentarian for a second. I was like, created 400 pages of timelines. I took down my digital footprint, Talinda's digital footprint, Chester's digital footprint, my biological mom's digital footprint. I brought in a bunch of mixed media so that I could piece together an even greater timeline. And I have a timeline going from 95 to 2000 and 1995 to 2023. Wow. And when I laid those pieces over each other, I was like, oh, so you did, so the same thing happened to you first, Daddy. That's interesting. You know, like, oh shit, we're the same person. And then I started to reflect seriously back on things, and I was like, no, that makes sense. There's a lot of, like, gatekeeping and gaslighting and blackballing for me. And I could see that in the way he acted. And then suddenly I realized, like, what I thought was humor from him was his only way of communicating his seriousness. He wasn't allowed to be serious. He had to be goofy, happy, silly. So he'd say things like, you know, like, it's kind of like if you watch Rick and Morty, and there's the episode of Rick, and he's like, I'm in the body, I'm trapped in here, this is terrible, this is not a song, I'm not dancing, somebody please save me. It's like that. It's literally like that. And you're like, okay, that's weird. So, like, most of what I thought was my dad's sense of humor for all of the time that we knew each other, you know, realistically, I don't know my dad. That's really what it comes down to. I met the guy when I was 8.5. We tried to build something out of that from that point on, but there wasn't anything before that. So the guy I met was already 30 years old when I met him. You know, he was already 29 years old. I didn't know that guy. He had me when he was 19. So, like, you know, I don't know this guy. And then realizing that, like, oh, okay, he loved me for sure, but I don't know him. And then something really interesting came to mind. He was, I remember his music, like, oh, well, maybe it's in his music then, because if music is an expression of symbols, and those symbols are basically a diary, then, like, what is in his music? I started going back to his music after I made the timelines. I started seeing all of his music from a different perspective as an adult. I was like, it was hard to listen to at first, but then I realized, like, oh, there's a dissonance I'm hearing, and it's coming from the cognitive dissonance between what he's saying and what he's meaning. So I need to now realize what he's saying and what he's meaning. And then I remembered that during A Thousand Suns, he had shown me a demo of When They Come For Me. And I asked him, I was like, well, what is this song about? Like, you guys are clearly saying something about somebody. And he's like, I'm not telling you that. All you need to know is in the song, and you can deduce it on your own, and you need to read into it. So whatever you can pull out of it is what you'll get. And I was like, whoa, like, he's encouraging me to read hidden messages in his work. And it didn't happen until I was like 24, 25, because I wasn't able to see him from that far away yet. He was too close. And then when he's gone and time passed and I finally got that timeline together, it was like, okay, now's the time to go start looking at those messages. And they're doing all sorts of cryptic stuff, like, and they've been peddling, Linkin Park has been peddling hidden Masonic messages in their work for their entire career. The In the End music video featurette, Joe Hahn literally says, we use the Freemasonic alphabet to carve the symbols into the portal that Chester walks out onto in that yellow tower. So it's like, you could read it if you want, but you have to be resourceful. It's like, okay, I can play this game. And so it became a game. It was like, okay, take as many associative elements as possible and just connect. And I developed an intuition at that time that was so strong through my own practice that I could tell what wasn't real. I could go as seriously insane with it as I could possibly go. And I could still reel it in and be like, okay, 3/4 of this is garbage. This 1/4 is good. Or, even just spotting subtle details like, oh, you know what? That one probably actually isn't real because of this timeline. And then being like, but you know what? It probably goes here. And then putting it over there. And all of a sudden you got this mosaic and you're like, whoa, that literally looks like a smoking gun. It's like, okay, so I see that you were shot. I see a gun was involved. And I see that they stabbed you for fun and left a note on the dagger that said, you're never going to figure this out. So somebody is here saying something to me, and it's like, I'm walking it back and I'm walking it back and I'm going over it. Like, this isn't like a one-time thing. This is like, we're doing this a dozen times a day. We're really, really we're treating it like a sport, like there's a reason that I'm out here doing the Kendrick halftime show for hundreds of hours online. Is because I already did it. I already lived 1,000 lifetimes before I came to you with the evidence. I did my research. And what it looks like is that Chester has always been eyed by Warner Music Group. Like I said, as far back as Grey Days in the early or the late 1990s, they seem to have been working out a contract with Warner. And so they had to have known about him. Chester was very well known for doing, he was not only a household name where he came from during the Grey Days time, but he also did the circuit. He performed in front of all the labels hundreds of times,
Mm-hmm.
And then he did it 100 more times with Linkin Park. So, by the time that he hit Linkin Park, or, received the invitation and accepted it, he was like a seasoned professional, like 3 times over. And I think that's something people don't give him a lot of credit for. He grew up in like one of the craziest places, which is where I grew up. And on top of that, he also involved himself in the community. He was doing the drugs. He was hanging out with the drug dealers. He was doing the crazy shit. Like he was in the trap houses. He was doing the hard stuff. And he was doing it from a very young age. So when he came to Linkin Park, he was already not only a seasoned veteran, but he also saw like the darkest parts of humanity. And he was also a victim of those parts. That has a big influence on what you do as an artist. And that's one of the reasons I think that, Emily's such a funny choice, because Emily is not that. Emily is not that. Emily is royalty somewhere where you're not allowed to have yourself. And he was all about himself. Like he's literally a hippie. Like he's like the free love psychedelic crazy person. And he had to become somebody else for Linkin Park. And that's something I noticed really serious. Like it was such a serious recognition. It was like, oh, by minutes to midnight, you had shed your old skin, climbed the ranks to like literally the highest, you're talking about underground hip hop here. This isn't underground. This is like full-fledged, like Jay-Z's peak.
Mm-hmm.
He's like 2004 to 2006. They're doing the Collision Course album, and so like he had,
Num Encore. Yeah.
right, and he hit the top of rock after quitting, and then he went on to be like a pop artist and all these other things and like dominate the charts in a certain way and dominate live performances in a certain way. But he was also like at the top of hip hop, which is like the craziest, weirdest thing. And so like,
Hybrid
but
Theory. We got the record right behind you. That was a crazy record.
Yeah.
It was a crazy record. I want to ask you. Not I know I'm interjecting here and interrupting, but we were chatting a little bit before we started recording here. Can you tell me a little bit about what you got behind you there? What it is, how you got it? Because people are, people are going to want to know, and people are going to come up with all kinds. They're going to say he printed this out on his printer at home and put it into a frame. Like what is that?
That is a 14 million milestone plaque for Hybrid Theory, gifted to me by my father, and it has googly eyes on it because Linkin Park is a joke, and also the all-seeing eye. I mean, that's kind of where I was going at there. Is like this is such a pivotal piece of my history because this is when I met him, right? That was his way of telling me how much he loved me, was by like gifting me with all of the rarities and like Linkin Park rarities and all the milestone plaques. And his thing was like, I'm your dad. I may not have been there, but look at me. I did it. I'm here. I'm fucking insanely like successful, and you'll never have to worry about anything again. And that was what Chester was. So like, this ties directly into the idea of potentially what happened to him, because you just don't make it that high without getting into business with people who entrap you and maybe even appeal to your darker side and get you into situations. I have a very interesting pathology about his relationship with Jay-Z. For example, like any video you watch with them performing together or accepting awards, Jay does not fucking want to be there. It's almost like he's just stepping on these guys because they're an easy target. They're hungry. Because that's what he was doing at the time. Like, I'm not saying that this is exactly what was going on, but Jay-Z was branching out and he was becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. And then here's this rock group that claims they're rapping and they're doing hip hop. Like, okay, whatever. And then they break the internet literally and create one of the biggest debut albums of all time. And then they do a second album that's just like their first one. And then they crush it again. And he's like, all right, so we're going to need to connect really quickly. And I could see, like, because I say it's an interesting pathology because I can see on one side Jay-Z being a gatekeeper for like the industry and being like, okay, we need to control hip hop because there are so many people who would take it to their advantage, so many people who would destroy what we've created. And in that side of things, I see a leader and I see an entrepreneur. And I see the need to grab this mostly, white band and correct them. Permanently tie their success to yours. I could see a very interesting power move there. And then on the other side, I can see a more vindictive, more like thing, because I could see their eyes, like I look at Jay, like the Grammy speech, Mike turns around, handshake him, and he's like, don't fucking touch me. Like there's this whole like weird ass thing. It's almost like Mike said too much during that. Like Mike got too full of himself. And to be clear, like I understand that Joe's Korean and I understand that Mike is Japanese. That's why I said mostly white. Because Rob is white, Chester, Dave, Brad. I mean, it's what it is. So I see the need. it's the same thing that like Kendrick did during the halftime show, right? It's like, let me redraw the line for you real quick. You thought this was about R&B songs? No, this is literal like performative art. It's a protest. That's what hip hop is. It's conversation. It's speech. It's expression on the deepest level. It's not your espresso by Sabrina Carpenter, right? Like, and I feel like a lot of people definitely, I know for a fact that a lot of people felt shafted by Linkin Park in their come up, and they had every right to feel that way because Linkin Park took advantage of a very of a, Linkin Park came up by taking advantage of people. And that's
Mm.
such a weird thing to say, but like if you know the history of nu metal and Nirvana and all these other bands that are coming up, grunge, and you see the way that they were systematically destroyed, that rebellion movement, and then hip hop was the other side of that. It was like
Yeah.
rock and roll and hip hop, you know? And then you got these people in the game of hip hop who are still relatively new. I mean, Jay-Z was pretty successful at that time and he had a few albums, but like it was relatively quick. Like he made some albums back to back to back.
Yeah.
So like his hold on the industry, it seemed to come very quickly. Where and he was stabilizing something, and there were a lot of people in the game stabilizing something. But like on the other side, there was no stabilization of anything. The grunge movement collapsed. Rock was dead. Metal was dead. And then it was like there was this giant hole of influence, and Mike just he orchestrated in a way that is genius. He was like, the best way to do this is to work it like a sport. We do 100,000 different versions of the same song. We get in the good graces of these record labels and we work the streets. We hand out our own flyers, shake the hands of our fans, go into chat rooms, create, merch that will one day be vintage. You do scavenger hunts with people. It's really genius in the way that it was constructed. But I can also see how two sharks might try to eat each other.
Mm.
So when I see like the Grammy acceptance speech, I can kind of see like Jay being like, "This motherfucker thinks he got one over on me," because really it was supposed to be two songs. It was supposed to
Yeah.
be a very short project for an MTV show that was originally Jay's show, right? Like MTV went to Jay after Unplugged and said, "Hey, you want to do this?" That's my understanding of it. "Hey, do you want to do this?" And then he was like, "Yeah." And they're like, "Who do you want to work with?" And he's like, "Linkin Park. I think I want to work with them." And that's how they got involved. And then Mike was like, "Hold on, hold on. I make remixes for a living," and then writes an entire album.
Mm.
And then it's like, "Jay, let's do it." And then Jay's like, "No, this is not what this was supposed to be." And now there's a grappling going on. Like, okay,
It
so one of the biggest rock bands and one of the biggest rappers is going to have to decide who is more influential.
it is crazy how that works, and you see it
Yeah.
in all the genres, really. I mean, it's happening to country right now. I mean, we have a
Mm.
hip hop and rap infusion into country music, and we have artists like Beyonce, coming
Mm-hmm.
from a pop, that type of background,
Yeah.
going into country because country's the popular thing right now. It's picking up steam. There's a lot of following in it. There's a lot of money to be made. And so you see a lot of times these shifts or these collaborations that kind of they spark a new interest, but then there's always that slight nefarious questioning around why are we
Yeah.
going to the why do we have rock and rap being fused together, and why do we now have rap and country being fused together? And I'm sure it goes back all the way to rock and classic rock and heavy metal and all
Yeah.
of that, and it eventually out the on the tail end of things, you get something that maybe becomes new, or a subgenre of something that maybe springs up out of it. But there's all these main players in the industry that are always involved in these different
Yeah.
moves, and it's always interesting to watch. So we've covered a lot of ground here, and I love the conversation, appreciate the conversation. I want to ask you here in wrapping up,
Yeah.
where are you today, right now, in your life, and what are maybe one or two positive aspects of your life that you really appreciate? Maybe they're people, maybe they're things that you do. Would you mind just sharing with the people?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I can definitely share that, and I will, and I appreciate your keeping the eye on the time. Because I'm not, I don't have anything over here, and I'm like really hoping that you're on it. But um, first, I want to just offer like a brief conclusion to what I was saying about what could have happened to him, because I think that there's a lot of like interesting, just, I mean, just that one moment in time is a great place to stop where the collision course happens, because in reality, there's a entendre like matrix there. Like, this means that, it means this, it means that. It's like you could go any way with it. And that's kind of the fun of these thought experiments that I have and that actually lead me places. um, because I found evidence. Like, this is not just me making everything hypothetical. These are like the things that I talk about on a daily basis with through my platform, through the Picture Pieces archive. Like, I bring receipts for everything. And if I don't know as a fact, then I will say that. And if I'm wrong, I will admit I'm wrong, and I will, fix it. So, looking at this time, it's interesting to think that Sean Combs was becoming very big, and Jay-Z was working with R. Kelly, and all these things are going on. And it's like, I can see Chester getting into the industry finally as like a transplant, like almost like an undercover agent kind of thing. Like, it seems more and more and more like Chester was actually James Bond, literally. I mean, he was working with the OCDA, the Orange County District Attorney, in a place that he lived, to pioneer a anti-human trafficking effort. That was 2014. That was the same year he was pictured with the Clintons. So, tie all that back. Like, I think Chester's always been somebody who's been very, just kind of like perplexed by the evil of humanity, and wanting to not only express himself as like a creative being, but also wanting to use that voice for something. And I feel like he probably got mixed up in a bunch of bad shit over a lot of years. And it culminated in something, because he was in and out of being undercover and being in these government operations and being in these charitable situations. And it's just strange. Like, for a guy so invested in constructive movement, so invested in transforming oneself, realizing one's highest form, it doesn't make any sense that he died the way he did. It doesn't make any sense that he was hanging out with the people he was hanging out with when he did die. Like, it doesn't make any sense. He had plans for like the next year and the next day. Like, it's crazy, and it's so strange to think about these things, because in reality, all that you can really trace it back to is the fact that there are people like Jay-Z's alleged evil, and R. Kelly's proven evil, and Sean Combs's evil that's in process right now. And you've seen the way that Scientology has been acting around Linkin Park. You've seen the way that Linkin Park has been treating itself and its fans and Chester's legacy. If you know me, you've seen the way that Chester's family has treated me and Chester's in the narrative around Chester's death and the mental health wave stimulated by that. And that itself, that wave, that movement, was even a government-funded operation. So it's like, okay, yes, okay, he could have died by suicide. He could have done it. Is it likely that it was just suicide? Not at all. Not by my standard or opinion, not by my deduction. If he did do that, he was forced into it by the people around him who made him probably feel a certain way or think of himself a certain way. And I know they made him feel a certain way. And then on the other side, it's that somebody did it to him and they made it look away. And there's evidence for that too. There's a lot of evidence for that too. And I think when it comes down to it, at the very end, conspiracy theories aside, speculation aside, you you cannot undermine in any real way the true impact his death had on the world, and how that impact was used to shape a narrative around not only mental health and mental health awareness, but also on like what's acceptable in the industry and what's not. Like, I mean, we could even go even further in speculation and claim Mac Miller's involved. Because I'm serious. He dies a month after putting an album out about how he's changed and he's not going down that road, and then he dies of an overdose. Like, I know a plant when I seen one. I seen Talinda. I know a handler when I seen one. I know what Ariana looks like. I don't need to know Mac. I don't need to be a super fan of his to understand that that was fucked up and there was something going on. So that's kind of like my conclusion on that, is that regardless of whether you're speculating or following the dots or connecting the dots or whatever, something's wrong. And the way that his death was utilized to shape societal energies is very real and undeniable. And so when it comes to, the way that where I am in my life and the way that it's impacting me, in conclusion, I do tend to feel alone, honestly, and the way that I am able to be perceived and the way that I'm able to be held by any given community. I don't have a lot of close friends. A lot of people can't hang. They don't have the intensity to be here. They can't handle even the implicit horrors of this reality that I'm fully embedded in and choose to be. It's very hard, and I understand that, and I don't take that personally. I don't take my isolation personally. There are a few people who I have had the honor of being in their lives, and they've contributed greatly in a positive way to mine. One of them is my partner, who brought me this tea at the beginning of the.
It seemed like spectacular tea too.
It was really good.
Probably the best tea.
It was the best tea, and it's great because today's our wedding anniversary, so I get to jump off and go chill with them and have a good time. And they've really been my biggest supporter and my only real supporter. I mean, I'm sorry, Josh and other people, but like, there's a level to it. Like, there's one thing to have friends to understand and communicate with about these things, and it's another to have somebody in and out of your life, or sorry, there for every day in and out. It's like there's just such a big difference, the amount of energy that person has to give you and the amount of energy they have to hold for themselves and the horrible things they have to go through. Because I'm not always stable, and I'm not shy about that either. Like, I'm very, very open about my mental health struggles throughout all of this, being gaslighted, discarded, neglected, isolated by some of the biggest voices in our society. I mean, Talinda literally just did an interview where she failed to, like, literally, like yesterday, did an interview where she failed to acknowledge what she did to me through the DVRO, and she pretended I didn't exist. And it was crazy. It was just like, wow, my own mother did that to me. Still, even after everything's over and everything's been aired out. And so it's definitely hard to come by people who are so locked in. But I do have a few, and Josh, you are one of them, and Branson, you're one of them, and I have a couple of really cool like friends around. And I'm actually I think the greatest thing that's happening to me in my life right now is that I'm expanding as an artist. Like, now I'm allowed to talk about whatever I want to talk about, because I'm not restricted by law. The DVRO, which was entirely false, is up. I've aired out all of the falsehoods, and now I can say what I need to about what I need to, when I need to. And in that way, I feel inspired by something like the Kendrick Lamar halftime show, because it's like, oh, I do have somewhere to be. Hold on, I'm on my way. Hold on, I'm coming. 1 second. I can do this. This is going to be like the greatest, caterpillar to a butterfly thing, because I'm not in my insecurities anymore. I'm not being held down by other people's perceptions. I'm totally free. And the way that's come out for me in terms of my art the way that that's expressed in my art is that I'm now I'm now in hip hop. Like I'm just there's no way I'm gonna write a normal song ever again. Like I'm just too inspired by my ability to speak, too inspired by the idea of putting words to rhythm. Like I'm just so invested in total expression, and that seems to be the best way to go. Like I'll write songs, of course. Every rapper writes songs, but like my my gratitude and my gift right now is being able to pay it forward in terms of the art, using my voice as only a tool for constructive healing and conscious expansion. It's, to be able to have friends I can give my energy to and be grateful for, and to have a partner as amazing as the one that I have. And you don't need a million people to be in your life. You only need like 5 or 6 good ones, and then maybe even less than that. I've survived on much less than that. And then you just need the art. And I'm saying it right now, like I'm writing a song about love, and shortly after that, because I can't write songs about war without writing songs about love first, I'm going to rip it. I am going, like, a lot of people might be surprised by um, what ends up becoming of me, because they just never saw it coming. Like they'd be like, "No, not Jamie." Really, Jamie? Like, are you sure about that? I used to be the guy that used to, I used to be the guy that'd be like, I don't even listen to hip hop. Like, I wouldn't even give J. Cole a chance or Drake a chance. And a lot of that came from trauma around music and who listened to what and how they treated me. But, as a person who's looking for that elevated state of being, who's always striving to be that greatest version of themselves in every way possible, um, I think that artists like Kendrick, for example, artists like Claro or Tyler the Creator, or um, I have so many artists, Caliucci's, like there are just so many people in my mind that I could bring up right now, but I'll stick with Kendrick because I use them the same way I stuck with Max Payne early on. It's just like I see myself in you, and I see that I could take that further. And not in a way that's like, oh, I'm better than this. It's like, no, no, no. There's areas of complexity that I can touch that you aren't suited for, because I'm me. Like you have your own life and your own world and all those things. And there are things we could definitely like intersect on. Like I could be like, I'm sure we're both good at writing, middle fingers to people. But the way we do it and for what reason is different. The way we talk about love might be a little different, but we could still, intersect on the idea of love and idea of achieving a higher self. And so, I'm just here living in the energy, fine tuning what I am at all times, and getting deep into my spirituality, and through that my expression, and so my communication of symbols through the art, and paying it forward to the people in my life who have stuck it out with me or who are willing to give me a chance, because um, like I said, a lot of people can't be here. A lot of
Yeah.
people can handle it.
I I I mean, I think that's great, and there's a lot of truth in what you just said, and I think a lot of people are going to be able to relate to that too. Um, this has been a great discussion. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the time. You've been more than generous with the time and everything that you shared today. I hope that it gives people some more insight into you and who you are as a person, and how you got to be who you are today, and maybe they'll be interested in seeing who you are tomorrow and the next day and
Yeah, that'd be
five
awesome.
years from now,
Appreciate
so
it.
yeah, I appreciate the time, and for you jumping in here. So where can people where do you want people to find you? Social media, where what social media platform you want them to go to? Where can they find your art and information about you?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and I really appreciate this connection. You've definitely asked questions in a way that I feel is different than other people, and I've enjoyed existing in those dimensions, expressing myself now. So I appreciate that. Um, my my entire social media presence is it's over multiple social media platforms, but each platform performs a different function. So I call it the Picture Pieces Archive. And right now, I'm making the transition over to YouTube, where I'm hoping to have that as the primary face. So that's where you'll find the most information, the most content. You can branch out from there. I'm on Instagram as well, and that is for live reporting. I reported today, so maybe by the time this drops, I'll also be reporting again. But I've done a lot of fine tuning on that side. That used to be the face of the archive, but I decided I don't. It's too buggy, and I don't like the certain like censorship. So I moved over to YouTube fully, and I'll be slowly breaking that Instagram of 12 years down to nothing, and then using it solely for live reporting. And then everything on that will also, once that happens, always move over to YouTube. So even if you don't follow me on Instagram, you will be able to find everything on YouTube. On top of that, on the other side of things, I do have a SoundCloud, which I only have because I can very cheaply have an unlimited amount of storage. So I don't use their distribution or anything. I think that's a hack. I think they are hacks. I think that what they're doing is pretty villainous. But I love the idea of an archive. I've always loved the idea of scrapbooking or having like a catalog of your pieces. That's why it's called the Picture Pieces Archive. And so the SoundCloud side of that is my month by month logs. I basically do like songwriting sessions, seeds, improvisations, and I put them all up there, and they're mostly all uncut. I'll start putting more of my like produced music up there as well as I go through it, but I'm just kind of in the very beginning of experimenting with certain things in the studio, and so that's not what it is now. Right now, I'm in a what I call a material processing phase, where I'm converting and transferring media and information across platforms. So on my SoundCloud, all of my videos, all my big videos, will also be audio clips, so you can listen to things in time. So it's kind of a different thing than the YouTube archive, because the YouTube archive is all videos.
Got it.
So you're seeing
Got it.
like my Snapchats and my Facebook and all this stuff from all the way back, and it's in chronological order and also just uploaded. So I have like a playlist where I have everything chronologically organized, and I just add things to it, like Linkin Park interviews or whatever. That comes to mind, maybe there's like a Jay-Z thing, or maybe there's something, I'm just using Jay-Z because I already talked about him. But if anything comes to mind, I just drop it in. And so it's a chronological movie of my life, basically. And then on SoundCloud, I'm doing that with my music. So you'll have like the big video audios in between like months of music chronologically. So like you'll have on YouTube, you'll hear me like going through my day, like being goofy and learning myself. And then on the musical side, you'll hear me like working out like an epic song that's like 12 parts or whatever, like over 6 months, as all these little things are peppered in. So it's just a different way to look at me. And by the way, I use all of this in my practice. The reason that this archive exists at all in the first place is to provide not only clarity for my own mind when I'm working through my like memory work and things like that, but I also oftentimes when I'm making music or making film or film projects, I'll use objects from the archive, like sounds or clip audio, or take footage and just like collage it together and make collages out of things. So not only is this a tool for my self introspection, but it's also a tool of a bed for my self expansion. And that's why it exists. So it's a very personal thing online, but that's because it's literally just for me, and people have free access to it. So yeah,
No,
it's
that's
a
cool. That's
it's
cool.
a unique thing. It's not something a lot of people do, and so
Yeah.
have fun.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's awesome. So everybody should go make sure you check out his stuff. Go along for the journey. And for those of you that really want to do a deep dive into, certain stuff, it's all there. It's all
Hundreds
there.
of hours.
He's been talking about it for years. So, there I've gone down the rabbit holes. I've read it and everywhere else. So I know there's plenty of people out there looking for information. So no better source to get it from than you. So again, I appreciate the time. It was great chatting with you. And everybody, my name's Joe K, and it's just another day in the underground.